This is WWE superstar Drew McIntyre, and you're listening to the WWE Podcast.
The champ is
the one that everybody wants, me.
It's going to WrestleMania. Claymore! Austin 316 says I just whipped your ass.
This is my iron. You're going to acknowledge me.
Welcome to the Monday, June 19th, 2023 edition of the current State of WWE. I've got Anthony DeMarco with me tonight to discuss the topic of the collapse of the Bloodline, the implosion of the Bloodline, and we'll get to that in a moment. But we're going to talk about something a little bit more lighthearted to start the show. And Anthony DeMarco, how you doing, buddy? And I'll let you introduce the topic that we're going to just briefly talk about.
Yeah, so I felt, why not open the show with a bit of humor, right? And I'm sure a lot of the listeners have already seen this picture circulating, but the new headshot of Vince McMahon on WWE's corporate website, which when I saw on Twitter, not going to lie, I thought it was fake, but it was real. It's on their corporate website, not even WWE.com. It's corporate.wwe.com. So completely their official business website. And I mean, I'll let you say it, man, because I know you saw it for the first time just like 3 or 4 minutes ago. What do you have to say about that picture?
I mean, there's so many different adjectives you could use to describe this. I mean, it ranges from hilarious to sad to pathetic. I mean, it's a combination of everything. And I saw it, and I'm so glad you brought my attention to it, because I had saw something floating around as well on social media, and I ignored it because so many people make so many different parodies and all the, Photoshop stuff. So I just kind of brushed it aside. Oh no, this is real, guys. I mean, it looks like a parody of himself. It looks like somebody just decided, like Vince decided, I'm going to create a caricature of myself. And, just guys, you got to check it out. I don't know. It made me laugh at first, and I'm with you. It didn't seem like it was real. And then you go and look at it and you're like, no, this dude's for real. This is for real. So, yeah.
It's sad because, you go on the internet and you see clips of Vince McMahon from the late 90s, the early 2000s, even the mid to late 2000s. Hell, even the early 2010s. And like, he was always like a good-looking guy. Like Vince McMahon always, like, for as much as he was probably like a bad dude behind the scenes, we all know the stuff that came out about him this time last year around. But we always saw him on television as a very presentable guy, like in really good shape, super jacked at times, all obviously juicing. I think that was very, fairly obvious at some point, especially in his match against Hogan at WrestleMania 19, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. But like he was always like a good-looking guy for his age. But you've said it countless times on this show. Mother Nature is always undefeated, or Father Time, rather. Father Time is always undefeated. And everyone is going to get old, and Vince McMahon is just one of those people. I believe he's 79 years old, 78 or 79 years old. He's one of those guys that is just trying to fight reality and not accept the fact that he is going to be 80 years old in the very, very near future. And he's gone to extreme lengths to try and prevent that from a visual standpoint. But I think it's gotten to the point with Vince McMahon that, like, it's almost just, like you said, it's become almost tragic, because you've seen this guy who once quite literally felt larger than life and more powerful than anyone, desperate, and nowadays desperately grasping on to his youth and almost to his relevance in a lot of ways.
I think that's, again, I'm not trying to dive too deep into this. It is, everybody should go check it out if you want a good smile for the day. But I think it also speaks to, I mean, not only his just refusal to age, or the non-acceptance of aging gracefully. I just think as a society as a whole, sometimes that, there's that fear of aging, or people don't look how they look when they age. And I think that's also something that, you see more broadly in society. However, with Vince McMahon, I don't know if I'm really surprised to see this, though. I'm with you. He is a good looking dude. I'm fine saying that he is, and I think he would look way better if he'd stop dyeing every piece of hair that's on his body. He would look, I think, much more natural and just shave the mustache, dude. He tried it. I applaud that. You know, as a man, you tend to try to change your facial hair from, I don't know about a mustache. Very few people can pull it off, but a goatee, maybe a full beard, maybe, like whatever, grow out your beard, maybe clean shaven. With Vince, the mustache ain't working. It looks creepy. It just doesn't fit, even if he wasn't dyeing it. But, the one thing is, dude, just accept your age, man. He would look so much better. But Vince McMahon is just, he will go down swinging. He will be in a casket whenever that happens, and he will be fully, like, jet black hair. He will be a just for men, success story is what he's going to try to be. So, anyway, yeah.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about, and then we'll move on to actually the current state of WWE, not the current state of Vince McMahon's hair. But I know we've talked about this before about Vince on this show, but do you think anything that he's doing from an optics point of view the last, I don't know, since he's forced his way back into the company, so since January, do you think any of it has tarnished his reputation?
I mean, at the end of the day, people, here's the thing. The funny thing is, I don't know if it's funny or not, but it's still interesting to talk about, is the whole sex scandal and the payoff that he did for the woman or women in WWE to cover up his affairs. It's almost like that's been forgotten, and now as fans, we were like, yeah, that happened, but we're more mad that he's back and trying to mess with creative. So in a way, he's kind of done himself a favor of getting rid of the actual much more severe problem of, I don't know, having an affair, cheating on your wife, paying them off millions of dollars. Like, that should be still the topic, and it's not. Among fans, that's not, no one's even talking about that anymore, which if I were Vince, I'd be like, well, at least they're not talking about that anymore. That's way more serious. They've got us to focus on the current, the product, the creative. Is he in creative? Is he messing things up? Is he still tearing scripts up at the end of Raw? What extent is he involved in creative? So do I think it's ultimately going to tarnish his career? It'll be a blemish, but I don't think when you look at his body of work as a whole, that it's going to be something that we're like, well, that totally negates everything that he's done for the wrestling industry.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it is so crazy to think about the fact that like 11 months ago, he was banished from the company. And now it's like nobody even talks about it anymore. No. We just talk about but the only thing we talk about now is, like, is he like messing with creative on Raw? Was he behind that? Like, it's all about what he's doing for the actual product.
I heard he's at gorilla position last Monday night. You hear all these things, and like if I were Vince, I'd be like, that's a success. Like great, cool. I have people totally distracted. Look over here, guys. Don't look over here anymore. Look over here. So whether that was intentional or not, it has been a success. On top of the fact that as a culture, I think we have an attention span of a goldfish where we just like, okay, what's next in the news cycle? What's next in the news cycle? Very rarely do we hang on to things that happen for long in the news. Our attention span is awful. But all right, let's get into the current state of WWE. Much more serious topics, of course, with the implosion of the Bloodline. And Jay finally makes his decision. His decision was to tell Jimmy, you're out and so am I, and hit essentially sweet chin music, but it's just called the super kick nowadays, on Roman Reigns. And then both Jimmy and Jay on SmackDown double super kick Roman Reigns to end SmackDown. Crowd went crazy, and I'll just hand it to you. What did you think of the Bloodline's not over, but certainly it has been critically wounded.
I think it was a really good payoff. I think it's something that fans have been really kind of clamoring for ever since, you can make the case all the way back into the fall of 2020 when the initial friction with Jay and Roman started. But I think fans have been clamoring for something along the lines of this, certainly since the Royal Rumble and since Sami Zayn really started putting cracks in the foundation of the Bloodline. And to your point, I don't think this is the end of the road for the Bloodline. I ultimately think that all of them will fall back in line with one another. I think, the whole, blood is thicker than water thing will prevail. But I think that in the interim, it has been awesome. It's awesome storytelling. It's different from what we've been used to the last 2 years and 3 quarters, pretty much. for almost the entirety of 2022 and even into 2021 and parts of 2020. We were just used to Roman Reigns and the Bloodline and the numbers game, using that to his advantage to retain the championship time and time again. But now we're really kind of seeing a civil war, quite literally, and awesome branding by WWE as they try and promote Money in the Bank in just under 2 weeks' time. And look, I think it's going to be a great match. I think we all saw it coming fairly far away. I think both of us even pointed that out back in May, ever since what happened at the Saudi Arabia event. But as we always say, predictability isn't always the bad thing. And I think this is a predictable match, but one that everyone really wants to see.
It has been a long time coming, but as fans, it's not like we're sitting here saying, like, oh my God, finally. It's kind of like every step of the way we've been locked in. It's not like we still, after how many years that we feel right now, oh my God, this is going on way too long. There are, of course, the fringe fans that have, there are some that have hated the storyline. I think that that's more the exception than the rule. But by and large, I think most fans have been with this every step of the way. And name another storyline, I can't, in which we as fans as a whole have been invested every step for 3 years. I cannot name another one. Maybe Austin McMahon that started in 97 to 99, but even then, I mean, you're stretching it maybe 3 years. That went into almost 2000 before Austin got injured. So like, that's the only other storyline that I can think of that has gone this long consecutively, not breaking things up, but consecutive, that has been this successful, which is why there is no chance that the Bloodline just completely stops existing. I know Solo is there, and even if he turns on Roman, they'll find a way to continue the Bloodline name. The Bloodline name is now a money-making machine. You're not just going to just have it cease to exist. They have a cash cow that they milk every single Friday night, and they have no intentions of having it go anywhere. It's just the next chapter. So I know some people are saying, that's the end of the Bloodline. It's not.
No, it's not, and nor should it be. Like, they still have a lot of juice to squeeze out of this orange, and I believe that. Because, look, we all thought, like, like, after the Cody Rhodes match, like, it's the same old stuff, overbooked match, bunch of interference, a Bloodline helping him retain, which is all true. But now they've found a way since WrestleMania to go in a different direction and make it more interesting. And then when this part of the Civil War is wrapped up and he goes on to his next opponent to defend the championship, and don't worry, we'll get into that.
I was just going to say. Yeah.
But, we're going to be wanting to see Roman Reigns and the Bloodline on the same side. And I do think that this is a way for them to really prolong the entire the lifespan of the Bloodline by having them fight internally, and then back when they're on the same side and fighting a foe like exterior to the group, we are going to be wanting to see that. But it was a good break, a good change of pace, give us something different, because it had been so much of the same for so long. But as I just said, as you said on your weekend review yesterday, there is that big elephant in the room of the fact that Roman Reigns is just no longer required to defend the most prestigious championship in the company.
Before we get to that, because we do have a lot to say on that whole, it's going to be a 4-month gap, which is just egregious. Before we get to that, I want to just talk quickly about your Civil War comment, because I agree, and I mentioned this last time. I love the branding. That's just an awesome title. It's true. It totally fits. They're not stretching it here. Civil War is a great way to frame this. It's awesome branding, marketing. And to your point, though, do I think the Bloodline as a family will eventually come back together? I do. I think the Usos and Solo, whenever he leaves, and he will, everybody will reunite, but I don't think that's going to happen until Roman Reigns is a babyface, which is probably not until after WrestleMania 40 next year, that all of these men come back together, and it's going to be kind of a moment of, like almost like a DX reunion where people just are dying for this group to get back together, and the crowd is going to, just be through them with them every step of the way. So not only are they breaking them up now, thinking the Bloodline's dead, but eventually when Roman turns babyface, to bring them back together, you're talking about a whole new just totally babyface group that they haven't even explored that part of it yet, much less the heel part that they haven't even gone through yet. Guys, this is not going to be a group that just goes away. There is way too much storytelling. The family element of this, of course, The Rock, which, he's going to come and go maybe at WrestleMania 40, but he's kind of immaterial because he's going to come and go and it'll be amazing. And all of the marketing that goes behind it, sure, great, but he's just a flash in the pan because he's going to be in and out and back to Hollywood. So this is really going to be a fun story once Roman turns officially babyface and the group comes back. Maybe Roman gets beat down by a heel group. Maybe it's Imperium, and maybe Gunther and his cronies end up beating down Roman Reigns after WrestleMania 40, and Roman Reigns is starting to get some sympathy from fans. He's alone, and all of a sudden, Solo shows up, and then he gets beat down, and then eventually the Usos. So the reuniting of this group, probably in 2024, is also something that I'm already looking forward to as a babyface group that they haven't even touched yet.
Yeah, and there's a lot of times where, you never see these big groups become a babyface group, like the NWO Evolution. And I do think that the Bloodline is an example where you are going to want them to turn babyface. Like, remember when the Shield turned babyface, when they saved Daniel Bryan from I wanted to say the corporation, but from the Authority? Like, that was one of the biggest pops I've ever heard. And I actually think that was the night after WrestleMania 30 in 2014. And I think that something along the lines of that is going to be coming down the pike for the Bloodline. And I do think a lot of people are going to be wanting to see that. And when they do turn babyface, Roman Reigns specifically, they are going to have the entire crowd behind them.
Absolutely, because at that point we would have been nearly going on 4 years of being able to just boo Roman. We got it all out of our systems. He's shown us he can be the guy, and it's going to be interesting too if he's still champion. If the crowd now wants him to keep the belt that he's had for 3.5 years, there's so much, of course, that we have to talk about over the next 6 to 12 months. Many roads to cross and to travel down before we get there. But back to your original point, though, back to more of the near future. We are now at a place where we have Money in the Bank. We have a tag team matchup. We knew this tag team matchup was coming. I didn't know if it was going to be Money in the Bank or SummerSlam. We now have the answer, at least in the short term, that it's Money in the Bank. Civil War. Wonderful. Really, win, lose, or draw, the fact of the matter is that Roman Reigns is not defending his undisputed WWE Universal Championship at Money in the Bank, which means he's not defending it until maybe SummerSlam, maybe even not then. I would imagine it's SummerSlam. I can't see how it wouldn't be, given it's their quote WrestleMania of the summer. It's in Detroit. They probably wanted headlined by Roman Reigns versus maybe Jey Uso or Jimmy Uso, one of the two. I would imagine probably Jey, but we'll see. That would mean 4 months. I'll leave it at that for you. 4 months.
I don't want to come off as a Debbie Downer, especially after we just praised the Bloodline and Roman Reigns, but it's inexcusable. I always go back to the rule of having to defend your championship within 30 days. And maybe that's yesteryear, maybe that's being, like an old school guy or a dinosaur in terms of wrestling thinking. But I don't know, man. Like, you're telling me that between WrestleMania and SummerSlam, he's not going to have defended his championship once? Not once? Mm-hmm. Like, come on. Like, when has that ever happened before? Like, we have not heard about that championship aside from it being presented a new belt, which for a lot is meaningless because they're still carrying around the two other belts, but I'm not even going to touch that. But the actual championship has not been defended since WrestleMania, and it probably won't be defended until SummerSlam. Like, even if they would have done something, and I guess they still have time to do this, but even if they would have done something of like putting that championship on the line against the Usos, like whoever gets the pin becomes the champion, and that's the friction that starts between Jey and Jimmy. Or something similar when they fought against Sami and Kevin. Just anything to show that he's defending that title, but it's just so crazy to me that the WWE Undisputed Universal Championship, a title that has been just created because he was holding 2 world titles for over a year, has taken a back seat to everything.
It has taken just everything that has been sacrificed for this belt, everything that you look back and go, wow, was it really worth this championship not being on Raw? Is it really worth Roman Reigns only defending it every now and then? they have added, let me start with the positives here. They've added the fact that when Roman shows up, just showing up is a big deal. That's how you know you're a big star. That's been formulaically great. I really have no problem with the fact that Roman sometimes takes a few weeks off at a time. I have no problem with that. My problem comes when you take like 2 months. Like for me, if you don't defend it at every pay-per-view, I can live with that. Once you start skipping more than one pay-per-view, one PLE, I start to go, all right, like, come on. I understand there's a big storyline going on here, but you're now, and we've talked about this, but it continues to rear its head. When you start to go multiple pay-per-views without defending your belt, and then you're starting to claim, and you continue to live on, wow, well, he's one of the longest reigning champions of all time, and all this. Well, yeah, because he's defending it now every 4 months. That adds artificially 120 days approximately to your run because you've been basically on vacation for 4 weeks. You haven't had to defend it. Sure, you've had, and again, I'm not crapping on the storyline right now or saying that the tag team match that he and Solo are going to have against the Usos is not worthy of a main event or that it's not been a good storyline. It has. It's been excellent. It's been excellent. I've been very impressed, and hats off to everyone involved. It just comes down to respecting the championship and the fact that you are kind of tarnishing Roman Reigns' run by now having these gaps that are just quarter of a year long. Are you kidding me? I mean, I understand what they're trying to do, though, and I mentioned this last night, and I want your thoughts. Do you think that most fans aren't like us, where they look at it and go, yeah, that is ridiculous, but look over here on Raw. We finally have a world champion that's defending it everywhere with anyone all the time. So that's okay because we have a world champion doing it on Raw. We finally got what we wanted. Do you think that most fans are looking at it that way? Or do you think most fans are looking at it going, yeah, we know Rollins is basically the anti-Roman going to the opposite extreme, but it's not enough for me to not care about the fact that Roman's not defending his belt ever?
It's hard to say. Like, I know there are some fans that just like to say, just like take what they feed us and, go with the flow, which on some level is probably the better course to take. But I do think there are a large portion of fans like you and myself, more of like, I wouldn't even say hardcore fans, but more of just traditional fans where storytelling and tradition, for lack of better words, do mean something. That tradition is not being a fighting champion in the sense of defending it on every single broadcast, but defending it at every single major event, i.e. a pay-per-view or a PLE. And I don't think asking your world champion to defend his title once a month at a pay-per-view is too much to ask. Like, I do think that the way that they've pulled back on their champions defending the titles, aside from Seth, obviously, but Roman and Brock before him, and even The Fiend to some extent, I do think that there is some, I guess, validity to that line of thinking because that's a benefit to being a champion. Like, if you're going to be the champion just to fight and defend as much as everyone else, then what's the point of being the champion? So I like that line of thinking, but when it gets to the point that you're not defending your title for months on end at this point, quite literally, I think it starts to devalue what that belt means. Because the other point about it is okay, it's the most prestigious title in the company. Agreed. It's two of the most prestigious titles are fused together at this point, unified. But you're telling me that nobody since WrestleMania has said, hey, you know what? I actually want a shot at this belt. Nobody has at all wanted a number one contenders match. Nobody's stepped up to Roman. Nobody's asked Adam Pearce about it. Like, that's the part that doesn't make sense to me from a storyline perspective. You're supposed to be selling this as the most prestigious title in the company, and yet no other wrestler has even mentioned it since WrestleMania.
Well, that logic could go back to Austin Theory last year when he cashed in or attempted to cash in on Roman and then ultimately decided against it or whatever because he said, well, if I was going against a bloodline, I know that I wouldn't have a chance. Or it's like, well, no, like you'll find an opportunity over the next year. It was just, I know what they were trying to do and I know what they're trying to do now. I understand that if you were to get Vince in the room or Triple H rather, hopefully Triple H and his team, in the room and ask them that question, they'd say, well, doesn't it mean more that he defends it less? Like, that would be their defense. And I would say, well, yeah, but bro, it doesn't just go for infinity. Like, in other words, you can't, the longer you go, it doesn't mean that it means more the more you wait. Like, there does come a cutoff. There comes a point where that law of diminishing returns starts to apply, where if you hit a certain point, I don't know exactly the number of days that is, or time period, we just kind of feel it, that it's just like, why are we not having, as you said, no one is talking about it. Nobody. He's carrying this championship that is apparently, that we're told, and I do feel, is the most important championship in the company. Sure, it's represented by 3 belts. I don't understand why they just don't get rid of those other 2. That's a whole other thing. I don't know if Paul Heyman just needs to hold something, the visual, I don't know, whatever. But the fact is, you're right. Nobody's talking about it at all. And again, somebody may say, well, that's because they're afraid of the bloodline. They're afraid that, they're going to get beat down. Well, now there's no excuse. The Usos are out. It's just Roman and Solo, right? Like, he's got a lot more enemies than he does allies at this point. So their logic against that would be, well, again, number one, doesn't defending it less mean it means more when he does? And number two, well, everyone's afraid of the bloodline. Those would be the 2 defenses that I could see them coming up with against that argument.
Yeah, I could get that. I could get behind it, but I still don't. You could always find someone who, a baby face, a holier than thou. Like, what has Bobby Lashley been doing on SmackDown? Like, honestly, like, I don't know. Like, there's just so many guys that on SmackDown that you could look at and be like, well, they have the manpower. They have the strength to go against the Bloodline. Like, I thought for sure you would see AJ Styles clashing with the Bloodline by now, just because they have the manpower, at least on some level, to match them from a numbers point of view. I don't know. It's been very frustrating for me to just have them take the championship and make it such a backseat and, I guess, secondary part of all this. And don't get me wrong, I think everything else they've done with the Bloodline has been awesome. It's just the championship part that has really kind of bothered me. But there's one thing I wanted to talk about quickly before we wrap it up here is, and I know it may seem minuscule, but Jinder Mahal, he's a guy that, and I will, full transparency, in 2017, I quit watching SmackDown when he was champion. Full transparency. And not even so much because I didn't like Jinder Mahal. I just could not get behind the concept and the line of thinking that this guy went from a jobber to winning the WWE Championship. And I quite literally think he had never won a pay-per-view match before this. Like, I think he won it at Backlash in 2017 against Randy Orton, and I think that may have been his first title victory. And I know his run wasn't as bad as many people made it out to be, myself included, but I guess for me it was more the principle behind it. But I have to say that Jinder Mahal right now, in his current role, is probably the most effective I've ever seen him. Just his visuals of the visuals of his face and how stoic he is as the Indus Sheer just kind of runs roughshod on whoever they're facing. I think he has been awesome. I think that tag team has a bright future, and it's just kind of cool to see how Jinder Mahal has kind of come full circle here and has kind of been presented as one of the more effective managers right now in WWE.
Jinder Mahal is not a name I don't think you and I have ever spoken about, at least at length outside of his WWE Championship run that I know has been completely berated. The weird thing about that is when it happened, I was initially in the same boat everyone else was, like, are you what? However, I mean, I didn't despise it. I mean, I'll say the Kofi Kingston title reign I hated infinitely more than the Jinder one.
100%.
I mean, just for so many reasons that you and I have dove into so many times. But the Jinder Mahal victory, and then he continued to win. He held it. How long did he hold it? Was it 6 months? He held it
from May until November.
6 months.
Yeah, it was a pretty lengthy run.
Yeah. So the reason I think that they did that, if I'm not mistaken, was that they were about to go into a Saudi Arabia event, at least in the coming months. I could be wrong. I'd have to Google that. But I remember them going into it might have been the initial stages of the Saudi deal. or it was a test run with Saudi Arabia, or they were going to a country that would have benefited
Middle
them
East somewhere.
Yeah, that they would have benefited them to have a WWE champion that represents the population that they're going to, which makes total business sense. I mean, I understand why they would do that, and they probably thought, hey, this is a new market we're trying to get into, on top of the fact that what if we catch lightning in a bottle? What if Jinder Mahal, out of all the people from 3MB, is able to catch fire as a heel? And as we all look back, it didn't happen. It wasn't the most disastrous thing ever, but it had a lot of people scratching their heads that all of a sudden he could just beat Randy Orton. He's basically a world beater. No one can take him down. I understand the frustration, but I also I look at that as a business decision. And they said a bonus if things catch fire. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, and in hindsight, I completely get that. It was just from a creative perspective that for whatever the reason, I just couldn't get behind it. And the thing is that he made a lot of sense as a heel champion. And I believe about a year later, he won the U.S. title. And it made a lot of sense. And I do like Jinder Mahal. It was just that I think that it was very transparently formulated, like kind of, or fabricated, where they're just like, okay, who's our most notable Middle Eastern wrestler? And I know he's actually from Canada. I think he's from Calgary, but Middle East descent. And let's just push him to the moon. And it was just so obvious what they were doing that it bothered me. But for all the reasons you pointed out, it didn't make sense. I just wish they would have gone about it more gradually, because I do think that you had something there with Jinder Mahal. And I do think he's an underrated wrestler, an underrated performer. And I think that's what's coming out right now. Like, I really like the work he's doing with the Indus Like, his stoic face is just insane right now.
Agreed. Yeah, like right now, his work it suits him perfectly. He just has that rolled down. The Indus I have predicted that they are going to be challenging Sammy and Kevin before this year is over, before the calendar year is over. I predict that they're going to attack Sammy and Kevin at the end of SummerSlam after they beat whoever they're going to beat, whether it's Pretty Deadly or whoever in a multi-person match, whatever it is. After that, I think after the match, we're going to have the Indus attack Sammy and Kevin, and they're going to be off to the races, and they actually could pose a real threat, an actual threat to Kevin and Sammy's championships. I think that's a real threat. Now that's that may be an early call there. I think I may be pushing a little bit. It could be more in late year, even early next year. Who knows? But I agree. They're all on the right track. It's a nice combination. Certainly the whole business decision thing with the championship. The WWE has done this though forever. I mean, like even recently, Clash at the Castle, we have Drew McIntyre challenging Roman Reigns and nearly won it. Right, like Bad Bunny, Dominic Mysterio. They brought back the LWO from the crypt to present them at the event in Puerto Rico. So that makes business decision though. Is it kind of a total exposure of the business from that perspective? Yeah, like I mean, of course, you're just like, oh, that's real convenient. All of a sudden, Mansoor can beat 40 or 39 other guys at a Royal Rumble, but it doesn't do jack the rest of the year. Like, yeah, that stuff is very transparent. People sitting at home, but it's crowd pleasing. It helps them build goodwill with the crowd that they're trying to in the market they're trying to break into. I totally understand it, and as fans, I think we kind of need to understand that they're not just all about pleasing the fans creatively at home. It's about, reaching that new market. They are a for-profit organization. Those are the things, those are the kind of the trade-offs we have to accept sometimes.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. And I just wanted to give him some flowers because I do think that he's a guy that's very overlooked sometimes. And I think in a minor role on Monday Night Raw, he seems to be really kind of guiding a tag team that I agree I think that they're probably the favorite to dethrone Kevin and Sammy right now, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, right now? Oh, yeah. I mean, name another heel team. Pretty Deadly ain't going to do it. I don't think at the time anyway.
Viking Raiders.
I mean, the Viking Raiders, I would have said yes if they didn't just suddenly make them a joke again after building them back up and repackaging them and all that. All of a sudden, they're just they might as well go back to shooting hoops and doing the track and field events like they were doing the Street Profits a few years ago. I mean, they're probably right now at the top of the list. Yes, and that's pretty crazy to say. But any final thoughts?
Nope, I just wanted to slip in the Jinder Mahal praise because I do think that I've trashed him on my show several times, but I wanted to let everyone know that I do think he's doing a phenomenal job right now.
Well, good. See, guys, we end on a positive note. It's not all bash and trash. It's we do occasionally, once in a while, throw, as you said, some roses at the feet of the wrestlers. So, well, before you go, of course, I let everyone know that the topic that you provided us this past week on Retro, and any of your Twitter account or social media you want to share.
Yeah, so this past week on Retro, I covered, in my opinion, the best B-level pay-per-view of all time, No Way Out 2003. I swear it's not only because it was from the Bell Center in Montreal, but, you have a B-level pay-per-view that features The Rock, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Hulk Hogan, Triple H, Brock Lesnar, Kurt Angle, The Undertaker, The Big Show. I think just from a star power perspective, it was something that you certainly got your money's worth for. And my social media, as always, ADaMarco25. You can follow me there. Very good.
Well, a lot coming up. Next week next week, my God, is already a pay-per-view week. So we'll be chatting before the event, and I'm sure I'll have a lot to say. So thanks so much for calling on, buddy, and we'll talk in a week.
Yeah, man. Talk soon.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the WWE Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a show, or head to WWEpodcast.com. And for all of these shows ad-free, head over to patreon.com/WWE Podcast. Until then, we'll see you next time.